Коллеги, добрый день. Я рада вас приветствовать на Open Talk. Это несколько необычный формат. Позвольте представиться. Ирина Зарина, генеральный директор компании SHL, отвечаю за Россию и страны СНГ. И сегодня вместе со мной мои коллеги. Коллега из российского офиса Максим Пескин, он отвечает за разработку новых продуктов. И я счастлива приветствовать Эндрю Нельсен, который отвечает за американский рынок и за решения по массовому подбору. Это человек с огромным опытом в талант-менеджмент, и у нас будет час на то, чтобы побеседовать с ним, задать интересующие вопросы и просто расширить свой кругозор, переструктурировать собственный опыт. Мероприятие будет на английском языке. Все технические моменты мои коллеги прикрепили в чате. Пожалуйста, задавайте вопросы в конце, постараемся на все ответить. И, because it's in English, let's switch into English. So, welcome to Open Talk. And we are as SHL Russia. Irina Zarina and Max Peskin are happy to be joined by Andy Nelesen, who is market director in the US and who is responsible and leads volume hire solution in SHL. So Andy has a really vast experience in the area. So our topic today is talent management. And I believe that Open Talk will give us a chance to reframe our own experience and to consider what's going on globally and on the other market. So here we go, and I hand it over to Max.
Thank you, Irina. Andy, thank you so very much for joining us. Actually, a great honor and a thrilling experience to be with you guys today. We have quite a broad range of issues to cover. So I guess we'd start with more strategic, more of a general outlook themes, moving on to more tactical, down-to-earth problems in talent management. So basically, to kick it off, Andy, from your experience, over the past 5 or 10 years, how has this sphere of business changed? What themes are most relevant or probably fashionable in talent management today?
Yeah, and again, first of all, thanks for having me. It's a real pleasure to join all of you. This is a topic that I care a lot about. My entire professional career has been focused on talent management in one aspect or another. So I really do believe in the power of the performance of people and maximizing the contribution that employees can make to business. So again, thanks for having me. But as we think about talent management more broadly and kind of how it's changed, I do think it actually has changed a lot, primarily because every client that we seem to work with these days is facing some sort of their own business transformation. And, you know, when I first got into the field of talent management and HR 20 plus years ago, HR didn't really have a real seat at the table. I don't think, you know, we were so focused on technology and process that we often neglected back then the important contribution that people really make to business performance. And now, as we're in this landscape where business transformation is the requirement, we have new customers that are requiring new kinds of emerging capabilities to meet their needs. There are new competitors that are really upending traditional markets and driving innovation. But the hallmark of all of that innovation today is that it's driven through people. So people, the contribution of people really is at the heart of the business agenda. It's how transformation is happening today. And so that's an exciting opportunity for all of us that sit in the field of HR. I pulled a little bit of data on this topic. Deloitte suggests that 79% of global executives rated agile performance management as a high organizational priority. And when they did a survey of CEOs to ask what talent management initiative will be most important to them in their business, the number one talent initiative was redefining jobs, right? Reimagining how work even happens today. Again, because we live in this landscape of change, of transformation. funneling through the contribution of people. So I think it's a fascinating, exciting time for all of us to really be driving that important agenda.
Apart from redefining jobs, which problems would you say are in the limelight for a typical HR executive today?
Yeah, I think we've seen a big focus over the past 3 years or so on performance management. There's a lot of new science that talks about the importance of kind of taking a more continual approach to performance management. I personally have some issues with the concept of performance management. So I think there's a ceiling in terms of the contribution that we'll find through just pure performance management measures alone. Recruiting has seen a lot of innovation.
Could you just give a glimpse of what innovation you're talking about?
Yeah, I was touching on the concept of recruiting, which has certainly seen a lot of innovation. I think largely driven by changing dynamics within labor pools, talent pools across regions. But I think the number one thing that I really see our client organizations embracing and kind of struggling with is just the concept of teaming, finding new ways to drive teamwork that delivers outcomes. And part of that is driven by technology, things like the call that we're on today, where we can reduce geographic barriers and collaborate in new and powerful ways. But there's also some underlying structure. I think we've learned a lot from the field of IT as it relates to teamwork. They've put together very tight teams. They even call them scrums, with very near-term deliverables and a lot of action that drives towards those near-term deliverables. So I think the field of talent management is embracing some of those key concepts that I think were well learned within the field of IT, and applying those more broadly across the organization to drive teamwork. So hopefully those are some thoughts I have, but hopefully that answers the question.
Well, thank you. It definitely does. We'll have to circle back to teamwork and team performance within some time. So the thing is, we'll definitely have to circle back to the problems of teamwork and team performance in a little while. But I'd like to get back to specific trends in talent management for the time being. Apart from, in order to compartmentalize that, apart from the truly valuable, valid, and relevant trends, are there some that are perhaps not as relevant, but still fashionable, in vogue, widely talked about? Something that you hear a lot on, say, on the Facebook or on LinkedIn, but still don't really see as an applicable theme for business.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I've seen personally across many of the client organizations that we support is just a lack of real grounding in the problems that we intend to solve. This is pretty basic stuff, right? But how are we going to measure success? How do we all agree, all across all stakeholder groups, right? That, even at the board level, the executive level, across all levels of leadership, what exactly are we intending to accomplish, and how will we know if we did it? And so that's a relatively basic thing, but I think often with talent initiatives, that's really hard to do. It's hard to gain consensus, and it's also hard to measure impact. And so I think we as an industry need to make a little more progress on how we do intend to measure that impact, and how we intend to make sure that all stakeholders agree on the importance of the initiative, and how we're going to agree whether or not we're doing well against that. The KPIs, right? The performance measures that will tell us whether or not we've been successful. And as business has been moving so quickly, the rate of change is higher than ever. That's a step that I see being skipped over quite frequently. And until we get that very senior stakeholder buy-in, and they clearly understand what success and failure looks like, I think it's hard to have a lasting contribution when we don't have some of those basics. I think that's a challenge that I see often.
And I agree that this is a question on the board level as well, because your culture and people within the structure now is considered as the factor of competitiveness. And to understand what is criteria of success, you're absolutely right. It's a grounding for everything. Otherwise, it's just a fancy stuff around it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's hard to do. It's easy to say we should do it. It's much harder to actually deliver in that way.
But has there been actually any progress in this area, or are we still trailing behind as a steer, like behind finance management or operations?
Well, I think we're always going to trail behind because our contribution is not as stark. It's not as black and white. It's not as clear. It doesn't fit neatly in a spreadsheet, and it's rich in subjectivity, right? Everyone might want to point at the different reasons why, it's hard to isolate the contribution, the specific contribution that talent management makes in the context of lots of business initiatives, right? That it might all lead towards those similar outcomes. It's actually, I think, easier to identify when the talent management elements of a business initiative go wrong than when they go right. And so keeping our senior stakeholders apprised of those lessons learned when they've gone wrong, whether that's in our organization or leveraging examples and use cases that are published more broadly, to keep reinforcing the importance of getting the people side of things right. The culture side, Irina, I heard you use that word culture. It was probably 30 years ago that the term culture eats strategy for lunch was written by Peter Drucker. And it's as true today as it was back then, I suspect.
That conversation actually serves as a perfect segue to the next question concerning the shifts, not just in paradigms or approaches, methodologies, but the very terms, the very words, the very concepts that we use in talent management. Do you feel that the way we define, say, leadership or teamwork or performance has changed substantially over the past decade? And if so, then what should we expect next?
Yeah, I think it has. I mean, I think there are some underlying leadership principles that will never change, but there's an important context around leadership in particular that has changed massively. And while it's not cutting edge, a few years ago, while we were part of the CEB organization, which then became Gartner, I think we did some really powerful work on the concept of leadership. And it was kind of fascinating how we got there. So we did a study. Initially, it was a business study that looked at business performance, and we were surprised to see that only 3 out of 10 of the S&P Global top 500 organizations in the world were achieving both their top line revenue and their bottom line profit goals. And so we said, well, that's interesting. Let's try and figure out what's unique about those 3 in 10 companies that allows them to be successful in both of those categories. While we initially looked at traditional measures of corporate performance, things like revenue per cost of goods sold or revenue per invested capital, these kind of traditional business school measures, there was no difference in those traditional approaches as it related to these 3 in 10, these 30%, and their peer group. No difference at all. And it wasn't until we realized that it was the revenue per full-time employee, revenue per FTE, that was decidedly different for those 3 in 10. In other words, they had figured out a way to unlock the contribution of people in some way that was just fundamentally different than what their peers were able to do. And employees for a decade now have been saying that they're overstressed, they're overworked, there's nothing new that can be added to their plate. So when we were digging in, it wasn't that they were adding more work to their employees' workload. It's that they were figuring out a different way to help their employees deliver. And when we peeled that onion back a little bit further and we kept digging, what emerged was this concept that we eventually called network performance. That might be a term that many on this call are familiar with. So the hallmark of that network performance is that a successful employee in this new world context is able to build a really rich coalition of peers, of employees, a network, if you will, that they can tap into to extract value from when they need help with their own work. And they equally as important, they contribute to that network. So they help others. And what we learned was a decade ago, the average employee would spend time with just 3 other employees throughout the course of their day to get their own work contribution completed. But now in this new work environment, with the pace of change at a rate higher than ever, those successful employees actually engage with over 20 employees in a given day to contribute to their work. And so building this network, this concept of network performance really started to emerge. And then when we applied that concept of network performance to leadership, how is it that leaders can foster and create a culture of network performance so that entire teams are behaving in that way, actually fostering and facilitating that kind of collaborative spirit with other teams? We started to see something that emerged more than just kind of network performance, but something that we called enterprise leadership. So that's when you have an entire team of network performers acting in that way, and which is actually quite rare. But when it happened, the impacts on the business model were quite impressive. Those kinds of teams were 23% more innovative. They were 15% more adaptable. They had higher engagement levels within their teams, meaning their employees were more inspired at work. And even their customers had higher customer satisfaction levels. So yes, I do think that the context around leadership has really changed in this way. We've got to find ways to create structure, to create infrastructure across our teams that allow them to behave in this way and actually make them feel comfortable behaving in this way, because it might not be a natural fit for many of our employees and many of our teams. We went on to actually create a whole kind of competency model around this, and it wasn't that the traditional competencies around leadership changed. It's that we added new ones that didn't exist. So there were 4 new competencies that we added to our definition for leadership, and they were building the network became a new competency, energizing the network became a new one, creating interdependence, and then enabling the network. Those were all new leadership competencies that we added to our model.
Well, yeah, since there's a question from the audience.
Yeah, that is a question from the audience. And Andy, do you have any successful examples how we as SHL help to other companies, to our partners, to work with this network performance or enterprise leadership to support leaders to develop this capability within the company?
Yeah, lots of them, in fact. We do, competency model work in support of our customers where they're looking to define a model that's going to drive performance for their business. And that might include a model for their individual contributor employees as well as their leaders across different levels. And so infusing this kind of thinking into competency frameworks and models with definitions and details that sit behind some of these new emerging competencies is definitely work that we've done at scale with many organizations around the globe. And we've also, some of our legacy assessments, things like the occupational personality questionnaire, among others, have also been evolved so as to be able to measure these kinds of things and bring in both self-awareness to employees across levels on kind of what their natural tendencies are related to these new emergent competencies, as well as kind of developmental resources to help them get better. So yeah, there's lots of different ways that we've been able to support organizations on this journey. And, really at the end of the day, it is a cultural thing. So helping senior stakeholders understand the importance of this kind of enterprise thinking is something that I think we can all do as a starting point. There's lots of resources, in fact, that perhaps, Irina, we can even send out to the audience. I can share them with you if that's possible, that just could support having a conversation with your teams to say, like, is this a definition for performance that we want to think about bringing into our organization? There's some tools that we can provide to just have that conversation that might be useful.
So great, because SHL is great in assessing and also to providing guideline how to support and within the feedback and to be self-aware of, as a company, of this dimension. Thank you.
Andy, there's a question quite related to that some clients tend to ask time and again, especially given that network performance and enterprise leadership are powerful concepts and the impact once you implement those should be tremendous. The question is, what are the caveats? If it comes at a price, what is this price? So what might be the obstacles that hinder or even prevent implementing those approaches and attitudes? What should you definitely let go in terms of fostering a proper culture?
Yeah, wow, that's a great question. Well, first of all, change is always hard, right? And the change management lift of doing something new oftentimes stands in the way of the success of the new thing that you want to accomplish to begin with, right? So you've got to balance and weigh the capability of your organization to success. Yeah, so I think we were talking about change management, and just if you feel, you have to make a real honest calculation with yourself on the skill level of your organization to pull off a wholesale change management initiative. And if you feel like you don't have a track record and a culture of receptivity to change, you have to honestly ask yourself whether or not the benefits of implementing that change strategy is worth the merits of going through the process to get to that finish line. So I think that's a real decision that is one that you have to make eyes wide open in a real honest way with yourself. And then if you decide that, yes, it is worth it, right? We can't just stay the course because without change, we're going to fail. Then it's full speed ahead, doing everything that you can to really make sure that change initiative is going to be successful. So hopefully that's an answer to the question. Irina, Max, you may have other thoughts that you'd want to add to that.
Well, that answers most of it, I guess. But again, begs the next one. Would you say size matters or industry matters? Which enterprises are more prone to be more successful in terms of that transition?
Well, I think, kind of technology-oriented organizations just have a natural agility that makes, I think, it easier because they're constantly changing. And in fact, the role that they play in support of their customers is to help their customers drive change. So it's just embedded within their DNA. And I think high tech as an industry attracts people that are open to that kind of continual change because it's their normal, right? It's their everyday environment. The world of technology changes at a very, very rapid pace. I think there are other industries and sectors, if you will, that are a little bit more traditional, where legacy approaches, they tend to have some kind of embedded reverence, like I'm thinking organizations like finance and financial services, for example, they tend to appreciate the status quo. They tend to appreciate often a more conservative approach. Again, if you think about the way that they support their customers, often it's encouraging a stable, conservative approach to things like money management, right? Being secure, being stable, right? So that tends to be a little bit more within the DNA of those kinds of organizations, and I think sometimes we see big change efforts with that kind of an organization a little bit harder. But I say that also acknowledging that even for relatively traditional sectors like financial services, I mean, there are upstart technology innovations that are upending that sector as well, right? There's no sector that is immune to business transformation right now. So I think part of what we may have to do with some of the organizations that we support is figuring out first, how do we instill that entrepreneurial mindset within our culture? And then we'll be more receptive when we find things like sometimes the starting point is just building that change receptive culture. And then once you have that, then you can flex in different ways. Then it's easier to say, yes, enterprise leadership, for example, is something that we want to embrace. And so now we've kind of got the infrastructure already in place because we're a change receptive and a change resilient organization to be able to kind of mold in that way. So taking advantage of opportunities like that.
Okay. Well, thank you. We are at the half-hour mark, and I think it's time to move on to the question that I guess half the audience has been expecting eagerly. The questions concerning the HR technology and artificial intelligence specifically. So, Andy, do you believe we, as a SEER, all of us, the talent management professionals, are moving in the proper direction when it comes to introducing and implementing AI?
Yeah, that's a big question. I'd say yes and no. Well, first of all, AI and HR tech as it relates to recruiting, which is the common use case when we talk about artificial intelligence, and the use case that has inspired a lot of, I think, very rational concern is AI as it relates to supporting the hiring, right, practices. So things like measuring people based on their facial features and their body language, and all of those things I think are somewhat challenging. But even more broadly, things like chat bots and all sorts of AI that sits on kind of careers pages. So the focus for recruiting has been on evolving and innovating for quite some time. Yet, if you look globally, candidate resentment is at an all-time high. So in spite of all on evolving and innovating the concept of talent acquisition, candidates are telling us that they're not getting what they need. Candidate resentment is up 40% since 2016 globally, right? So then you got to say, all right, well, what does resentment mean? And this is where we've partnered closely with an organization called the Talent Board that does longitudinal analysis year over year on candidate behavior. I was sharing that we've been working with this Talent Board organization, and they've got really deep insight and knowledge on candidate behavior. And so when we think about and look into candidate resentment and what that actually means, there are some parts of resentment that candidates have been asking for forever. 58% of candidates feel that a good recruitment process will make them more likely to accept the role. 78% of thriving employees say they had a positive hiring experience. 62% of candidates were extremely likely to refer others based on their experience. So just having a positive experience where they're communicated to actively, where they understand the process, they know what's going to come next, they feel prepared for what is going to come next. These are simple things that candidates are telling us they are not getting. In spite of the advancements in technology, they're still not clearly feeling like they're being communicated to, and they know the process that they're going to go through, and they feel prepared. Now, beyond that, they also, and this is a real problem that I think we have to really embrace as a field, they don't feel they're going to be treated fairly. And in the absence of feeling like they're going to be treated fairly, like they are concerned that there's all sorts of bias that sits in these various elements of the process. So we've got to be much more active and clear about how we're evaluating our candidates, how we're communicating back to them after different stage gates in the process. And that leads to the last key element of resentment comes in the form of feedback. Candidates expect feedback. They want to know why they're moving forward in the process or why they're not moving forward in the process, and they don't feel like they're getting feedback today. But they're much more energized by your job and by working at your organization if you can give them real meaningful feedback that actually embraces kind of like how they should be thinking about their professional journey. Even if you're telling them that they're not going to get your job, it still makes them more energized to want to work for your organization in some other way. And even just asking candidates for feedback. So you might decide that giving feedback to every candidate at scale is a really hard thing to do, but even asking them for feedback. Hey, how was this process for you? Are there any suggestions that you would give us that would make this a better process for the next person? They become much more energized by your organization, by your employment value proposition and your brand when you do those simple little things. So AI, so that's a lead in, right? There are just some foundational things that I think we're not getting right as it relates to candidates and candidate behavior. So then that flows into the concept of artificial intelligence, because, you know, the thing that I think we often lose sight of is that artificial intelligence is really just a strategy. It's a way to achieve a goal, right? It's the means to an end. And often I think that end for many of our customers, and this is where my focus is primarily on volume hiring, so big volume hiring campaigns. But what organizations are very interested in doing is driving automation in their processes. Now, artificial intelligence is a way to help you automate your processes. It certainly is not the only way. So if automation is important to you, there might be some other places to start that don't require you to take on this big kind of controversial, dramatic topic that is artificial intelligence. So I was just studying an article that I was reading by an organization called Talent Now, and they did a survey of talent acquisition leaders globally, asking them, why are you interested in automating your talent acquisition processes? 55% said to eliminate tedious manual tasks. They want their recruiting teams to be focused on higher value activities. Makes sense. 39% to reduce time to hire. That also makes sense. Time to hire has ballooned over the past decade. 34% to improve quality candidates. 34% to improve the experience for candidates, 23% to reduce cost, and then all the way down to 12% to reduce bias. So yes, artificial intelligence, it might be a distraction, right? If really what you're intending to accomplish is one of those things, there might be some other strategies that could incrementally improve your hiring programs that don't also require you to implement a full-blown artificial intelligence solution. So a little bit of rambling there, but hopefully that's the start to the conversation.
Right. Well, you know, speaking of AI, and you've mentioned bias again, I'd like to ask a question just to confirm, or at least voice some of my suspicions. Well, AI is essentially a black box. You have data flowing in, you have a decision coming out of the system. You never essentially know why this or that specific decision had been made. So the question is, does the perception of bias actually increase among candidates that face AI-driven hiring solutions?
Well, it certainly can if you do it wrong, right? We published a position paper recently on artificial intelligence. And again, I can share this and you can send it out to the audience if it would be helpful. I'll distill it down to 3 key points. Artificial intelligence-based assessment is still an assessment. So everything that we've learned for the better part of the past 100 years in terms of like psychological understanding, psychometric, understanding of human performance still holds true. Things related to reliability and validity and job relatedness, Max, to your point, right? You've got to clearly demonstrate that what you're evaluating is characteristics and behaviors that are required on the job, 100%. So AI assessment is still an assessment, and don't forget everything that we've learned as it relates to using assessments generally. The second, AI assessment should be explainable to all parties. And you use that term that we hear a lot, that black box term. Yeah. If an algorithm is training and retraining itself, and there's some correlation to job performance, but you don't know what, you don't know what the factors that sit in that correlation actually are. And they're actually, not only do you not know what they are, they're unknowable based on the way that some AI can work. That's not something that we would recommend. That's ripe for challenge. That's ripe for bias, 100%. So that's something that we would find very concerning. Now, there are other ways, like you can still use AI, for example, but you can evaluate the words that people say rather than the way that their body moved or the way that their facial features moved. And in so doing, by measuring the words that are actually spoken, then you can still ensure that job relatedness is still connected. So so AI assessment should be explainable, I guess, is kind of the second. And then the last recommendation, if you will, is that big claims require big evidence. We mentioned this earlier, but psychology has been studying human performance for literally more than 100 years. So any new concept that layers in or even contradicts something that we've known to be true based on 100 years worth of data requires a significant amount of data itself to suggest that there is a new way or a better way or a new approach. And a lot of what we've seen in the AI landscape as it relates to hiring specifically in that context does not have really rich, full-size data samples that I think broadly as an industry we want to feel comfortable with. So AI assessment is still assessment. AI assessment should be explainable. Big claims require big evidence. Hopefully that's helpful.
Yes, thank you so much. I'll actually add as a kind of an aside comment, There's been a case about a year and a half ago in Russia, I believe, some company built an AI machine that was an automated graphologist. We know that graphology is complete bull in terms of measuring any aspect of human personality. So what they did was an automated machine for producing meaningless results, but still, they used garbage data and they got garbage results out. That again kind of proves that what you can do requires not just a lot of data, but good and meaningful data to begin with. Something that is relevant, is connected, is valid as a job performance predictor. Hopefully that sort of thing doesn't happen too often globally.
Would it be, I lost you there for a quick second, but how tragic would it be if you took some bias that existed across an organization and you leveraged AI only to push that bias further into the organization? Yeah, just tragic.
It is. That's definitely one of the key takeaways for the audience from our talk today. Speaking of takeaways, just to wrap up the HR tech landscape conversation, do you believe there are some dark horses here? Some approaches, methodologies, technologies that aren't yet front and center, aren't yet widely talked about, but still might be valuable, say, in the next 10 or 15 years?
Yeah, a couple that come to mind. One of them is completely unrelated to SHL. I'll start there, but I was just fascinated. I had a conversation with a group of MIT graduates that started a business where they basically created, and this is artificial intelligence. So they created an AI-based bot, but it was the use case was learning and development, and the bot sat on your computer and it kind of monitored what you were working on, and it would, in the moment, contextually offer up developmental opportunities and suggestions based on what you were working on, right? So let's say you were creating a presentation. It might serve up a research article, for example, right? This might be useful based on what you are working on. And then the way the AI works is it monitors which suggestions you actually use, and so that it makes its suggestions smarter in the future. So, just like that kind of truly embedded solution, like in the flow of work, is, and that's a term, right, that Josh Bersin uses, right, a lot, in the flow of work. That kind of contextual solution that truly sits in the flow of work. Those kinds of solutions, I think, are really quite intriguing, quite fascinating. So I guess I'm just kind of interested personally in that kind of thing. But
sounds fascinating.
Yeah, isn't it? Yeah, it really is. But I guess as it relates more closely to SHL, and I think a powerful role that we envision playing, really to the story that you just shared, Max, is, we think that objective data on people is critical. There's going to be lots of momentum to understand whether and how your organization is ready for your business transformation. And there's going to be lots of algorithms and algorithmic-based solutions that lean on talent data to suggest whether or not you are ready for that transformation, or how you could be ready, or where you have pockets of opportunity, etc. But if one of the inputs is not purely objective-based data, true data on people and performance, then we run into the challenge that you just so eloquently articulated. And we think there's a real opportunity for SHL to play a really powerful role in that kind of a approach. So that's something that I'm also quite interested in.
It really sounds fascinating. Thank you. Now, I guess of the final 10 minutes of our talk, it's time to move on to, changes that come willy-nilly, whether we're ready or not. The transformations brought on by the coronavirus pandemics. So first of all, would you say there have been some major and lasting changes in talent management? Something in terms of, the clients conceptualize their expectations and approaches and outlook.
Yeah, in a lot of different ways. I think there's going to be a lasting effect to this moment in time. I'll put voice to just a couple of them, but again, my focus is on volume hiring, and so and I'm based here in the U.S., although I do support all regions across the globe. But there's this concept that I call unemployment rate pinball, where for many regions around the globe, from the 2009 financial crisis that affected so many, where unemployment spiked, but for the better part of the past 10, 11, 12 years, for most regions around the world, there has been a pretty slow and steady month over month, quarter over quarter, year over year decline in unemployment. And what that brought to so many candidates and job seekers that were also then given technology-based hiring solutions that allowed them to apply to 100 jobs at the click of a button, it allowed them to really embrace their extrinsic motivators, right? I can have multiple job offers, so I can go for more money, or I can get a better title, or right, any number of things that, because in my mind, my base level needs are being met. And again, this I realize this doesn't apply to every region around the globe, but for many it does. I'm going to shift my focus to my extrinsic motivators. Well, in the blink of an eye, literally overnight, global pandemic hits, 40, 50, 60 million unemployed flood into the talent pools around the globe. And we're reminded of the fragility of some of these systems that we rely on. And I think what we'll see amongst candidates and employees is a rapid shift towards those intrinsic motivators. They're going to respond more to the employment value prop that shows a real commitment to ethics and an underlying stability to business, and an appreciation for remote work challenges, right? These more kind of basic level needs are the things that I think employees and candidates have very rapidly swung towards. And so if you can craft out an employee experience or an employee value proposition or an employee branding messages, and hopefully these are not just messages, but they're actually backed by a real commitment that embraces giving candidates, again, these more foundational needs around things like stability and ethics, I think you'll find employees that are willing to choose those things over the flashier extrinsic motivators that I think we felt relatively consumed by on that decade-long march down the unemployment train. So we should be shifting, right? The way that we communicate, the way that we message, the way that we demonstrate our commitment to our employees by, again, embracing some of those more intrinsic motivators. I think that's going to be important. And then beyond that, obviously, things like the video-based tools, which were kind of nice to haves before, are going to just be essential. And so how we get familiar with those tools, how we maximize those tools and the opportunities that they provide us to differentiate our experience to our employees and our candidates so that we drive those resentment rates down that we talked about earlier, while still leveraging these new technologies that now are a requirement, not just a nice to have. I think the organizations that get that right will come out ahead.
Right. Well, that also brings us back to one of the questions that I wanted to circle back to earlier, the one concerning team performance. And the question is, how do you personally maintain and manage team productivity during the isolation and quarantine phases of current existence? Well, probably not just productivity or effectiveness, but also, general overall sanity, personal and team level wise.
Yeah, I think, well, I'll answer this one in a personal way. In my job, I traveled extensively, and then I was in our office here in Minneapolis, Minnesota, when I wasn't traveling, and then all of a sudden that ended dramatically, and I have 4 kids, and they're all home with me, and my wife is an essential worker in a clinic, so she's going into the office every day, and so it became on me to have a very different worldview about the things that were important to accomplish in any given day, right? I had to make sure that that my work responsibilities were being met, but I also had all sorts of new family responsibilities that were really on my shoulders to make sure were being achieved. And so when I think about how I engage with my team, my experience, the shift that has occurred to me in my life, everyone has that story, right? Everyone has their version of the story that I just told, right? So I have to acknowledge and see the challenges that I know are real for me. I've got to see those challenges in everyone that I work with, in everyone that reports to me, and understand and appreciate that all of those really hard challenges are being faced by all of us, and that this transition period is not easy for anyone. And so there's an empathy that I think is required. And then beyond that, more tactically, there's a real prioritization that's required, because we're not going to be able to get at everything because there are a lot of distractions. What are the critical few things that are absolutely pivotal and required that we need to prioritize with our teams, keep them focused on, give them the freedom and the stability to do all the other things that are required of them in this moment in time in our life, while also hoping to get at those critical few things that are a prioritization to keep our businesses moving forward as well. So hopefully that's helpful. That's a lesson I'm trying to learn. At least it's a journey, and I'm not there yet.
Yeah. I guess to kind of wrap it all up, what are your expectations for the second half of the year, given that they say that 2020 has been an extremely challenging, unprecedented year? So ranging from personal to professional to whatever. What do you feel should happen? What do you want to happen, perhaps?
Yeah, well, I think I'm actually quite impressed by many countries around the globe have really put together, I think, solid plans. And if you look at China, for example, who was hit very hard by the pandemic first, and very swift actions. And if you look at their productivity, generally, their business output, they've really bounced back almost 100%. And I draw so much inspiration from that. And there are many other countries around the world that have done and are doing things that are very similar. And they are bouncing back, and they are finding a new normal, and they are innovating in powerful and creative ways. And so I have no doubt that we will get there. I lean on some of these examples as inspiration. Other countries like the U.S., for example, if I'm being fully honest, right, that we've got some lessons to learn here, but they are learnable, right? There are examples that we can get through this, and so I'm choosing to remain optimistic. I think that we will get back in different ways, and I think what we'll see coming out of this, we won't go back to work the way that we always did, but we'll see tremendous innovation. There is a resilience. There is a resilience to business around the globe that will solve some of these new challenges. I have full faith in that. So I'm choosing to remain optimistic and trying to follow the path those that have gotten it right.
Okay. Well, I guess that's it then. Thank you so very much. It's been a blast.
It seems that we're running out of time, and we have one question. There's one question from the audience. What competencies or capabilities are a must for a modern HR professional?
It's definitely that agility, driving agility, obviously both within HR, your function within your organization, but helping your organization become more agile broadly. The one thing we know will be constant is change. So let's make sure that we're ready for that change.
Suras, thank you very much indeed. And Andy, thank you for joining us. And everybody, thank you for joining. I believe that we do not waste this good crisis, and we will have all our lessons learned. And I hope they're learnable. See you next time, and hope that you enjoyed this open talk. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all. Goodbye.
Bye.